I literally ran into Snoop Dogg.
Really?
Literally.
Did you?
Literally.
Okay.
I was in the club lounge at
I thought you were gonna say you was at the club.
No, I wasn't at the club. I wasn't rolling down the street smoking Indo, sipping on gin and juice.
In your 6'4".
Not that I know those lyrics from my teenage years.
That's the Old Testament or New Testament?
That's the old Brent. No, that's not the new Brent.
That's the BC Brent.
Yeah, that's the I'm saved but still remember some stuff. Brent.
Oh, listen, I got some too.
But no, I was in the Gatwick Airport in London in the little lounge, frequent flyers lounge or whatever.
Yeah.
And I accidentally ran. I was backing up and I bumped into it, turned around. I didn't say a word, Jeff, because it's Snoop Dogg.
Right.
I'm awestruck.
Yeah.
And he just looked at me, shrugged it off like it was no big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, and went, "What's up, y'all?" Kept on walking.
Well, only thing that I got with that is I was in Orlando headed to DC for 201, and Michael Irvin was in Orlando, and he has a lot going on right now, and you could tell he didn't want to be bothered, and so he has his hat over his eyes and he's got these shades and stuff, but he's Michael Irvin, man. He's Hall of Fame, and Super Bowl champ. So you could tell, when some of the guys just don't want to be bothered, and so I was like, I'm thinking to myself, should I go and bother him? And so, yes. And so I just went over, and all I could say was, "Hey, what's going on, Hall of Famer?" And he's like, "What's up, man?" And so I was like, he just had "That's all I'm giving you. That's it. Don't ask me for anything else." And then I was just thinking, why are you here with us commoners? Like, he was just in the, right there in the B terminal, right, for American Airline. And I'm just...
Why are you flying American?
Yes, he was right there flying American.
Sorry, American.
Sorry, American.
Sorry, American. Sorry.
Sorry.
I mean, you're an amazing airline.
Yes.
You are the Walmart of the skies. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. It's terrible. Terrible.
For our COO Nikki and for our marketing director Brian, they love American.
Yeah. They love Charlotte and Dallas.
Yeah.
Why?
Yes. Yeah. But for us, save people is Delta all the way. Yes. Okay, sorry. Snoop
He was
Dogg.
nice.
Yeah.
He was nice.
Yeah, that's cool. He should have.
I didn't say anything though.
Yeah. Was he? Does he look like the same in person?
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Kind of tall, lanky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he got those old dreads though, man. I just need to let them go. Like, they're long and they're gray.
Hey, that's his trademark.
It is his trademark, It's trademark.
You got to dance with what got you there.
Yeah, that is true. Yes, yeah. Well, yeah, I guess so. I'll just leave that alone. And
speaking of Snoop Dogg, welcome back to another episode of the Chasing Elephants podcast.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, listen, when Brett and I tell you that we love life and we love doing life together, it's a real thing. I hope you know this is really just our everyday,
yes, sir.
Our everyday lives and stuff. It frustrates sometimes our staff and staff meeting, particular Nikki. She doesn't like it when we have fun, But hey,
ooh, I didn't say it. I did not say. She listens to every.
I know that's
I did not say it,
Nikki. You are my teammate and my homie. Yes, you love it when we have fun.
I would never throw you under the bus.
Yes, you love when we have fun. Just after you give us our list. Grateful for you, Nikki.
How do we transition? Moments. Defining moments. We might have just had one.
Yes, we did.
I do like this series.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that we've been able to identify two big ones so far. I think every one of them's big.
Right.
So first one had to deal with opportunity,
right.
The second one had to deal with trials. And then we're going to talk about betrayal today. Why is that? How can that be a defining moment? Because how we respond to betrayal will, in many ways, define either seasons of our lives or other relationships or how we make decisions as we move forward. But those are defining moments.
Right.
And then we're going to also talk about, in the coming weeks, moments of encouragement that define us.
Yeah.
And then we're going to close out with moments of transition because we're all going to have to go through
absolutely
different phases of life. I want to take just a quick moment if you're listening and if you're watching, will you do us a favor and just hit the pause button right now? Actually, don't do it right now. Do it after I finish this statement. And will you go ahead and like or subscribe or share the Chasing Elephants podcast with your tribe or your friends? And if this has been a blessing to you at all, take a moment right now, hit the pause button, and do what you do with whatever platform it is you're on and listening to this material to help us get the word out.
Yeah. Good.
Well, thanks so much for doing that. And let's talk about moments in which we deal with betrayal. Let's start out this way, Jeff. I think we've all dealt with this.
Yeah.
You and I talked this week to a very close friend who was betrayed.
Yeah.
Who had somebody do something that was deceitful to him.
Undermining.
A lot of words could, I
got a few.
And you got a few. Yeah, that's right. But here's the thing, it hurt him deeply.
Yeah, it did.
And he, I think, did what you should do. That is, before he reacted, he reached out to friends who were going to pray for him and who were going to give him some wise counsel.
Yeah.
We happened to be one of probably several on a list. But it was as we were walking into this week's episode, it was a great reminder that there are going to be moments in which your people are going to betray you.
Yeah,
people are going to go behind your back.
Yep.
People are going to say something about you they shouldn't say.
Right.
You're going to get stabbed in the back at some point. And I wish it wasn't so.
Yeah.
But it in living in a fallen and a broken world, I think it's something that we're all going to have to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely.
At some point.
Yeah, and it's how do you respond to those moments, man? Because if you know that, the key to it all is how do you really kind of navigate that without becoming cynical, in the midst of it. And I think, I appreciated our brother reaching out to you and myself and others, and that we, prayerfully gave him some words of encouragement and wise counsel and how to respond. And hey, we're all human beings that we can get in our flesh. I know, gosh, I have at moments, and there's moments when people say things to you, especially in this particular situation, when unequivocally it's not true. And you want your natural response is to defend, is to fight back. You and I, we were thinking in defending our friend, wanting to fight back. But I love what we're going to talk about today is ways that we can respond in moments where we are in despair. And I think as we look at Psalm 63 and how David really kind of gives this beautiful psalm as he himself is in a desert, he's in the desert of Judah, and how he responds through this psalm, I think, is very applicable, to what we're trying to talk about today.
So let's set this thing up. Oops, excuse me, I just kicked our table. Forgive me. Let's set this thing up. So in Psalm 63, David is crying out to the Lord because he has just experienced probably the biggest betrayal of his life.
Absolutely. Now,
it wasn't the worst day of his life, as we know. The first worst day of his life, I think you would agree, being a dad, is the day he lost a child.
Oh, man, yeah.
So that's day number one. This is probably the second worst day of his life, is to have a grown child then turn on you.
Yeah.
And in David's case, not just turn on him, but lead a coup against him.
Right, exactly.
So the people that he trusted, his counselors, his confidants, some of his family, had betrayed him. And he's run off of his throne, out of his kingdom, out of the immediate part of his kingdom, populated part of his kingdom, to the desert region of his kingdom, and he finds himself alone with his thoughts and alone before God. So to me, here's the big takeaway. When people are betrayed, they either fight or they flight.
Right.
You either fight or you flight. You either stay and punch or you run away.
Right.
And what David shows us is fighting or fleeing. Neither of those are the response.
Yeah.
Crying out in the right way is the best response. And so he's going to show us what that looks like. in Psalm 63. Primarily, I mean, obviously it's a whole chapter, but 1 through 3 reads this way: "O God, you are my God." Jeff, you're a better Bible interpreter and able to rightly divide the Word of God than I am. But one of my favorite things about the word God here that he uses is he uses Elohim.
Yeah.
Elohim was a Hebrew word for God that does not really speak to God being personal typically.
Yeah.
This is the word for God that's used at the beginning of Genesis.
Yeah.
And all throughout Genesis. This is the God who's so powerful his words can create.
Yeah.
This is a Hebrew word that really focuses on that part of God being powerful and mighty.
Yeah.
And yet what does David do? He goes, I'm going to attach personal possessive terminology to the word Elohim. Oh, Elohim, you are my El. We say. That's just out of the gate, there's something different at work here. In him crying out in the midst of this betrayal. Oh God, you are my God. Early, or some translations say earnestly, will I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh longs for you. Soul, flesh. A lot of people think that, a lot of scholars believe he's trying to describe the entirety of his being. My soul, all the immaterial part of me. My flesh, all the material part of me. In other words, all of me is crying out to you and longs for you. In a dry and a thirsty land where there is no water. Obviously, that's very a metaphor. Yes, he was in a desert region, but he's also describing the way he felt. So I've looked for you in the sanctuary to see your power and your glory. And verse 3 is maybe in this entire chapter the most powerful verse.
Yes, it is.
Because your loving kindness is better than life. My lips shall praise you. In the midst of this betrayal, I have a reason to worship. Because in the midst of this betrayal, your loving kindness for me, God, is better than the life you've given me. Like it's better than anything in this world. You could almost translate, my lips shall praise you. My lips can't help but praise you. It only makes sense. And so this is a bad day. And so how do you overcome betrayal? And David shows us a way to do that and a pattern to do that. And really just the first one, and I'd love for you to speak into this, the first thing is we see that he overcomes by believing in God's sufficiency. I am petitioning the God who's so powerful that he can create matter with his word. That God is big enough to be over my circumstances. And he's my God. He's small enough to be inside of my circumstances.
And I love that. So what David is saying, that regardless of my circumstances in this wilderness, in this desert, oh God, I'm going to praise you. And I love how even some translations say, I eagerly, or earnestly, as you mentioned, there is this sense of consistency, desperation. And he talks about, and he uses the word thirst. And when you think about the thirst, because obviously he's using this metaphorically because he's in the desert. But I love what Spurgeon says. Spurgeon says that though he was in the midst of a desert, physically, there was no desert in his heart, meaning that there was no dryness. There was still this desire, this thirst for God, this praising, even though he's in the midst of a place of despair, of discouragement, and this wilderness experience, that my situation won't impact my worship. My surroundings won't dictate, my ability to praise you earnestly, eagerly. And so we know that even when we're in hard moments, Brent, even when we have those times of despair, what should our response be? Is, hey, we still praise God in the wilderness. God, oh God, I'm not going to praise you when I'm on top of the mountain exclusively. I'm going to praise you when I'm down in the valley or in the desert. And that's what David is saying. And then he moves into verse 3 to 6, where he says, hey, the greatest love of God, it stirs, that great love of God, it stirs a response of praise. And I love how And in the CSB, because I'm going to be consistent with this. Sorry. He says, my lips will...
I'll stay old school over here.
He says, my lips, verse 3, my lips will glorify you because of your faithful love is better than life. He says, I will praise all these things. I will praise you. I will praise you as long as I live. At your name, I will lift up my hands. You satisfy me as with rich food. You satisfy me as with rich food. My mouth will praise you with joyful lips. And so he's saying right here, listen. Then he goes on in verse number 6. He says, when on my bed I thank you, I meditate on you during the night watches because you are my help.
That speaks to that continuity.
It does. It's that he says, what am I going to do in the midst of everything I'm going on? Your love for me. You know what the response of me that I have to you, God, oh God, Elohim? I'm going to glorify you. I'm going to praise you. I'm going to lift up my hands. He said, I'm going to praise you again. Why? Because you satisfy me. And when I think of you, it stirs up praise. And so here's what we know, that David, who has experienced hurts and heartache and discouragement and despair, he doesn't whimper and he doesn't wallow in his circumstances. His response is praise, and his response is worship, and his response is dictated based on his reflection on the goodness and the greatness and the still belief in the sovereign, the sovereign, all-powerful God. And I love that the imagery in this psalm again reminds us that, hey, even though there is dryness around us physically, that we should still have a thirst, not for physical water, but thirst for the Lord.
Yeah. So you can either cry about or you can cry out. And so David spends this entire psalm crying out to the Lord, not crying about the circumstances that he's experiencing. In other words, he's saying, God, you're big enough to be over, small enough to be inside my circumstances. But let's talk practically for a moment. What are the benefits of having that kind of a view of God? That he's big enough to be over. He's big enough to be over the whole earth and hold the universe in his hand, and yet he's small enough to sit down in this desert next to David as David cries out to him. And I wrote down a few. Number one, when I have this kind of a view of God, the kind that David has in this moment of betrayal, I don't have to be anxious. I struggle with anxiety sometimes, Jeff. I really do. I know that doesn't come from a healthy place, and I know the Bible teaches us to be anxious for nothing. But when the healthier my view is of God, the less reason I have to be anxious. So I don't have to be anxious. I wrote down that I don't have to be afraid. Because even in the midst of this barren part of his land, he's experiencing something that's better than any meal that all of the chefs that work for him could have created, he says, basically. And then I don't have to be sufficient. This is a big one. This is a big one for me. I don't have to figure all this out on my own. In fact, I don't even have to figure out tomorrow. David's just figuring out, what does it look like to cry out to God and recognize his sufficiency in this moment? So I think there's something to this thing. I don't have to be sufficient when other people betray. I don't have to figure it all out.
And I can still have a peace, because that's verse 6 and the A part of 7.
When you're not anxious and you're not afraid and you know that he is sufficient, the natural fruit of that,
It's peace. Yeah. And again, that's verse 6 and the A part of 7, because that's why he can lay his head at night on the bed and meditate. There is this symbolism of, man, for me to lay my head at night in the midst of all that's going on, I can meditate and rest on you. And then he goes on and says, during the night watches. And so in the midst of those dark moments in my life, I can meditate on you. Why? Because you are my help. And so if I know that I know where my help comes from, then that helps me, it should help me in those moments. I think if we're honest, Brent, you're not the only one who gets in, deals with being anxious and having anxiety. I know I do as well. I can tell you, I always have anxiety going into lift tour season. But just in other areas of my life, I mean, just these natural anxieties, but resting in the sufficiency and the sovereignty of God, and knowing that not only is he omniscient, he's not just all knowing, but he's omnipotent. He's all powerful. He has all things under control. And when I rest in that truth, it should help subside some of those natural anxieties or feelings that we have. And David is saying right here that, I feel this way, and I can have confidence in you as you continue to read 7 and 8, because you've already given me help. The reason why I can have confidence is because, you are my help, but he's also acknowledging that you've given me help before. And I love it. The rest of 7 and 8 says, I will rejoice in the shadow of your wings, and I will follow close to you. Your right hand holds me up. And so he's saying, I'm going to rest in this confidence that you are going to hold me up.
Sure.
There is this total surrender and total trust that David has in the midst of his circumstances. Now notice, he's not talking as if he knows, or that he's not talking in present tense like the situation is better.
No, it's future tense.
It's future tense.
Yeah.
Like it will be. He is trusting. There is a faith that he has in the midst of this barren and desert and dark moment of my life. God, I am believing that you are still the Lord that will help me and to hold me and to keep me through this moment.
The story doesn't end with the desert. It ends with the promised land.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
And here's if anybody's ever wondering, are you sure this is about betrayal?
Yeah.
The very last statement in this psalm is that the mouth of those who speak lies, betrayal, shall be stopped.
Yeah.
And so, but the key is, as we see, is trusting in God's sufficiency. I think that there's something that can be experienced in trials as well, trials and tribulations in the form of betrayal.
Yeah.
And that is that we can overcome by desiring God deeply. And what do I mean by that? That sounds so cliche to say, but when he goes, my soul thirsts for you, my flesh longs for you, that word longs for really, as you know, has to do with a physical, it's physical. It's literally my physical being grows weak out of desire for you. And this isn't something that, Jeff, you and I couldn't experience this every morning in our quiet time. We would be exhausted. This happens in moments like moments of betrayal.
Yeah.
I think what we're seeing is David is showing for us, when it's at its worst, you can experience God. And God's always at his best.
Yeah.
But you get to have your best experience with God when things sometimes are at their worst.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Also, I don't have to fight every fight.
Yeah.
And there's many fights that really I don't even have to attempt to try to fight. Why? Because he's already gone before me. And I love what he says in verse number 9. He says, but those who seek to destroy my life will go into the depths of the earth. And you just mentioned this. And he says, and they will be given over to the power of the sword. And what I love about what David is trying to articulate here, Brent, is he's basically saying, hey, listen, I'm going to trust you in spite of the trouble in front of me, right? And in spite of people trying to kill me, and in spite of all of the betrayal that I'm dealing with and I'm experiencing, man, listen, I'm going to trust you. And I think that it's important that we always remember that when we say we're men and women of faith, we have to trust that God has gone before us in the midst of our situation. So what do we know? We know that things that come to us that may catch us off guard, it never catches God off guard. God is never surprised. In his sovereignty and sufficiency, he's never surprised. And I think David gets to this place where he's like, hey, listen, obviously if you're bringing me to it, I trust that you're going to take me through it and that you're going to get me to the other side. And so it's a great reminder, at least for me, because honestly, we have in my own life, in our family, Brent, we've dealt with some very hard moments, whether it's with home with my mom and my siblings and family, or just even in my home with my wife and my kids, and especially my kids are my kryptonite, if I'm being honest, and so whenever my boys go through, it's like, oh my gosh. And there have been moments where I've failed. My response hasn't been David's response here in Psalm 63, but this song, this Psalms, and this moment that David is sharing right here, it's reminding me that, hey, even in the midst of all that's going on, I have to have confidence that the King is still on the throne,
right?
And that I just need to trust Him in the midst of everything that's going on in my life.
So we've got a first of all, our view of God, belief in God's sufficiency. That speaks to our view of God.
Right.
Then there's an experiential element to dealing with betrayal, in which I can desire God deeply, because what happens is my dependence on God grows when I am betrayed by outside forces. But then number 3, we can also overcome betrayal by trusting God completely, which goes to something you just said a few moments ago, where I don't have to always solve this. I don't have to figure this out. I don't have to bring this to resolution.
Right.
I can trust God to bring this to resolution.
Right.
I oftentimes will say at the beginning, you mentioned Lift Tour, at the beginning of an event that I'm either in charge of or I'm asked to speak into, but I'm preaching at.
Right.
My prayer is always the same. God, we're going to do everything we can do. We're going to trust you to do what only you can do.
Yeah.
And so I've got to trust God with the resolution of betrayal. I got to do everything that I can do. But then I got to trust the Holy Spirit of God to accomplish God's will and God's purposes in the midst of this betrayal. We demonstrate our trust in God by what we worship. And so, is our worship, I guess we could say it this way: is our worship evidence that demands one verdict? I trust God with my every moment, and even this betrayal. And to be somebody who overcomes, to be somebody who is more than a conqueror, it means that you stare in the face of betrayal and you still go, I have decided to follow Jesus.
Yeah. And at that moment, that is very difficult if we're honest, because our flesh wants to respond, right? And so, but if you're going to do what you just articulated, then that means that you have to have a not my will type of response to the betrayal, because our will, our flesh, our desire is that we respond this way. And David is saying, no, our true will and desire is to respond this way. Right. Instead of responding in a get back, we respond to God. I give it to you, and I trust you with it. And that, if you are a person like me who likes to control outcomes, sometimes that can be, if we're in our flesh, that can be difficult. It's tough. And here, I'm sure, if we can speculate, but I'm sure there was these moments in David's flesh where this might not have been his real feelings, consistently.
Yeah, he may have sat in the desert a while for pen to paper. He may work through some other feelings before he got to the right ones.
I mean, in the wilderness, the idea, the imagery I think of being in the wilderness is that you're sitting there and there's nothing around you. There's barren. It's barren all around you. It's dry. It's dead. There is nothing, and you got to just sit there, and maybe that's a moment while you're in that moment where the Lord's having to work on David, to get him to a place of total surrender, to be like, you know what? Okay, hey, I know you're dealing with this, but what's going to be your true response? And I think there is always those defining moments in our lives where we're going to say, are we going to worship God in the midst of, or are we going to try to respond to God, respond to the situation and hope that God bless in spite of, and that's some of the tension points there. And David is saying, no, I am going to praise you. He starts off by saying, I am going to praise you from this wilderness experience.
And trust you with the outcome. Yeah, and if you don't do it this way, let's flip the script on this, Jeff. If your response to betrayal is to cry about instead of crying out, then that wrong response leads to very unhealthy outcomes down the road. For example, then you don't trust anybody.
Right.
Or you start to be cynical about anybody who betrays anybody else.
Yeah.
Forgiveness gets taken off the table.
Absolutely.
You're slow to forgive. The
Yeah.
Bible teaches us in Colossians 3 to forgive as quickly and as completely as Christ has forgiven us.
Yep.
We're slow to forgive. So we're prideful in our perspectives. And,
Yeah.
and there's so many unhealthy places that road leads to. When
Yeah.
you spend your time crying about instead of crying
Out.
it leads to a multiplicity of sinful and unhealthy places
Yeah.
in your soul and in your mind
Yeah.
and in your relationships.
Yeah.
But I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you, my brother and I have dealt with on individual levels, and even together a couple of times people have come after us.
Yes.
We've dealt with some betrayal. But the reality is, if you cry out instead of crying about, you're leaving the door open to have a relationship restored with the one who betrayed you. And is that not a picture of the gospel?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we were but enemies to God.
Yeah.
So am I handling betrayal? And to me, this is the ultimate test. Am I handling betrayal in such a way that the door is open for there to be reconciliation?
Do I really want reconciliation?
Yeah.
You know, yes, we want to be reconciled. We want to be reconciled to God. But what about to our brothers and sisters? I mean, that's a difficult question, because it's easy, Brent, for us to say in our church environments, oh, we thank God that Jesus died on the cross to, redeem us, and then we were reconciled back to God. We love that. That's so good. But what about the ones who betrayed you? What about the one who hurt you? What about that person who's really close to you, who broke trust in your relationship, and the relational equity is now, it's been broken and damaged and stuff. Now, are you open to reconciliation? And I think that is the question. And then even in those moments of betrayal, I think in order to be open to reconciliation, you got to go through a process where you move from weeping to worshiping, right? Where you move from crying over the situation to God, I'm going to worship you, and I'm going to pray for opportunity of reconciliation if it's possible. And if it's not, God, I'm still going to worship you, and I'm going to release this to you and trust that you will not only take care of the situation, but you'll also heal my broken heart, amend my broken heart, in that.
I'm going to give an extreme example of this in an effort to kind of put some real life testimony to this thing. There was a youth pastor that when I was coming up, I worked for. That was like an internship or something like that, part-time, or I can't remember. And he lived in a nice neighborhood, and his daughter, the kids would all, one of those neighborhoods where the kids all play together,
Yeah.
And his daughter, he had two daughters. They were going over to the neighbor's house. Neighbor's kids come over to his house, but the husband next door molested his little girl. And to make a very long story short, he ended up in jail, thank God. And my friend, this guy I worked for and looked up to and still look up to, stood up in a courtroom and said, and he wasn't saying I reconcile with you. He was not saying I'm going to be your friend tomorrow.
Yeah.
That is not what he was saying.
Yeah.
But he said, in the name of Jesus, I forgive you, and my family forgives you. Now, this guy done a lot of damage.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of damage and scars for years to come.
Wow.
About 2 or 3 years into this guy's incarceration, he emails my friend, and he goes, I need to ask your forgiveness. And my friend replied, and didn't want to talk to him, but replied, I've already forgiven you. Just a quick response.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk to this guy.
Yeah.
And this guy kept going, no, it grieved him what he had done, as it should. It's the most disgusting, deplorable thing on the planet. And what Jesus said about those who had harmed children is appropriate. It's better that millstone be tied around your neck and you be thrown in the sea of Galilee. So I kind of with Jesus on this subject.
Yeah.
But this guy kept emailing. And finally, my friend thought, well, I'll share the gospel with him.
Okay.
5 years into the guy's incarceration, my friend led him to Jesus.
Wow.
Through email.
Mm.
Now, they're not going to be buddies.
Sure.
They're not going to go golfing together. They're not going to share a meal together. Mm-hmm. And so there is some type of reconciliation that's probably not possible.
Yeah.
I'm gonna venture out to say, you hurt one of my kids, I'm gonna have a hard time being your friend.
Amen.
You betrayed me, we're probably not gonna be buddies down the road. In that sense.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean I can't forgive you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean I can't point you to the one who will ultimately forgive you.
Yeah.
That's leaving the door open.
Mm-hmm.
You cry out instead of crying about. You're leaving the door open for Jesus to do exceedingly abundantly more than you could have ever asked or imagined.
Man, and that is the gospel lived out, and I think that's the beautiful thing that David shows us in this beautiful psalm. And I think that it's important that we really ask ourselves, because I believe, Brent, that there are many of our audience that are probably, you're in this particular defining moment right here where you've dealt with some type of betrayal and some type of disappointment or despair. And the question is, how are you going to respond to it? Because the way you respond to it really determines the level of intimacy that you can ultimately have with God. Mm-hmm. And because as long as we push away, we refuse to forgive, we refuse to let go, we refuse to really worship God in spite of the situation. And what it does is it further pushes us away from God, and it impacts our ability to have intimacy with God. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the lesson in Psalm 63, because could we say, in layman's term and in our flesh and in culture, David had some justification to hold on to the anger and the despair, and okay, I can see that. I mean, but was that his desire?
Right.
No, his ultimate desire was to worship God, mm-hmm. and to have an intimate, deep, connective relationship, mm-hmm. with him.
You can't sing "Woe is me" and worship at the same time.
Right.
And David is choosing
to worship,
to cry out and worship. And I know it sounds a little bit cliche, but what we're saying, guys, is that there are going to be moments in your life where people are going to betray your trust.
Yep.
And your friendship, your relationship. And I don't want those things to happen. I don't want you to go through moments or seasons even of experiencing the consequences of betrayal. But let's also be honest about something else. Each and every one of us are one step away from stupid. Yeah. And there's going to be moments in your life where you may betray somebody. Yeah. And you're going to need somebody to forgive you as quickly and as completely as Christ has forgiven you and Christ has forgiven them. Yeah. And in those moments, whether you're the betrayer or the one who has been betrayed, when you feel the weight of it, and in one sense you feel the weight of your sin, and in the other sense, if you're not the one who has done the betraying, you're feeling the weight of somebody else's sin, or the consequences of their sin, I should say. And you got to choose either way to be somebody who's going to cry out or cry about. Yeah. You can't woe is me and worship at the same time. And the only way to cry out in betrayal is to trust the sufficiency of God. Yeah. Desire God deeply, and then to trust him with the outcome. And that's what we see in David's life, and he's a great witness and a great testimony. Yeah, man, that's good, man. That to me, Brent, is one of I think all of these defining moments are so important and pivotal. But that's one I think really many leaders and students, a lot of our students, I know as we've talked to many of our leaders and students, this is one that really is a struggle, of how to deal with moments of despair, how to deal with moments of betrayal. And so, I mean, I hope, ladies and gentlemen, that this episode was as helpful to you and for you as it has been for myself and Brent, man. Amen. It's so good. And so, well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for hanging out with us again. I hope that you'll follow us at SOU Lead. I hope you'll follow Jeff Wallace
at I Am Jeff Wallace.
Myself as I Am. I don't care if you follow me, whatever. It's all good. Brent A. Crow, at Brent A. Crow. But follow us at SOU Lead. Until we meet again, wander well and shine like stars.
Take care.